There was a time when I believed that every meaningful transformation announced itself before it arrived. I imagined that the moments capable of changing a person would always carry unmistakable signs. A difficult decision, an unexpected loss, a conversation impossible to forget, something dramatic enough that years later you could still point toward it and say, that was where everything became different. Life has slowly taught me something far quieter. The deepest changes almost never introduce themselves. They enter your life unnoticed, disguised as ordinary days, ordinary people, ordinary moments. Nothing appears extraordinary while you're living it. Nothing asks for your attention. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, your perception begins rearranging itself before you've even realized it has started. By the time you finally notice the difference, the person who first encountered that moment is already gone. I've spent much of my life believing that understanding required time. I thought people became meaningful through accumulation, conversation after conversation, shared experiences. Disappointment survived together, forgiveness offered without being asked, years slowly stacking upon years until familiarity became connection. It seemed logical. Relationships, I believed, were built the same way a craftsman builds a home. Patiently, deliberately, one careful piece resting upon another until eventually something lasting emerged. I still believe time matters, but I no longer believe time is the only architect. Sometimes a single presence quietly accomplishes what years never could, not because that person changes your life directly, because they change the way you observe your own. I'm not speaking about attraction. I'm not speaking about admiration. I'm not even speaking about trust. Those are names we usually give to experiences after we've already lived through them. What I'm describing exists before language ever arrives. It begins as something almost impossible to explain, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of your own mind, a different quality to your thoughts whenever silence returns. For years I depended on order. Everything inside me followed patterns I understood. Every emotion had a reason. Every reaction belonged somewhere. Whenever confusion appeared, I examined it until it made sense. Whenever uncertainty disturbed my balance, I created enough distance to think clearly again. If someone remained difficult to understand, I accepted that not every mystery deserved solving. It was a simple way to live, predictable, organized. Peaceful. Many people misunderstand silence. They imagine silence as emptiness. I've never experienced it that way. Silence has always been the place where I become most complete. It's where unfinished thoughts finally slow down, where scattered emotions stop competing with one another, where questions remain still long enough to reveal whether they deserve answers at all. Whenever I retreat into quiet, I'm not withdrawing from life. I'm returning to the place where I can hear it honestly. That is why I've always been careful about who I allow into that inner space, not because I distrust people, because clarity has always mattered more to me than company. I've noticed something curious over the years. The people who work hardest to be understood often reveal the least about themselves. Performance creates noise. Noise hides truth. Most conversations never move beyond carefully managed versions of who we are. We anticipate reactions. We adjust our words. We soften certain parts of ourselves while exaggerating others, not because we are dishonest, because we are human. We all carry an invisible desire to belong, yet something is quietly lost whenever we are more concerned with being accepted than being present. Presence is rare. It doesn't try to impress. It doesn't compete for attention. It simply exists. I've crossed paths with countless people. Some were intelligent, some generous, some unforgettable in ways I still struggle to explain. But nearly every encounter followed the same familiar rhythm. Eventually, I understood them well enough. Eventually, they understood the version of me I had chosen to reveal. A comfortable distance settled between us. Neither side questioned it. Neither side expected anything beyond it. For a long time, I convinced myself that this was simply how human connection worked. Perhaps I truly believed it, or perhaps I had quietly stopped imagining anything deeper was possible. Expectations have an unusual habit. If we hold them long enough, they slowly disguise themselves as reality. After enough years, we stop asking whether something exists. We simply assume that because we've never experienced it, it must not exist at all. Then, without warning, life offers a single exception, not to embarrass your certainty, only to remind you that reality has always been larger than your conclusions. What unsettled me wasn't another person's presence. It was my own response. Nothing dramatic happened. No unforgettable confession, no extraordinary conversation, no cinematic moment where everything suddenly made sense. If someone asked me when my perspective began changing, I couldn't answer honestly. There was no beginning visible enough to remember. The shift happened the way dawn replaces night. No one witnesses the exact second darkness becomes morning. You only realize daylight has arrived after the entire landscape already looks different. Awareness follows the same rhythm. It doesn't appear, it accumulates. One observation, one silence, one ordinary interaction, then another. Then another, until one day you realize you're seeing the world through eyes that quietly learned a different way of looking. That realization surprised me, not because I had started paying more attention, because I had started paying attention differently. Instead of listening only to words, I found myself noticing pauses. Instead of searching for explanations, I became curious about what remained unspoken. Some conversations seemed complete precisely because nothing more needed to be added. Others continued endlessly while somehow saying almost nothing. It made me question something I had accepted for years. Perhaps language isn't where connection begins. Perhaps words simply arrive afterward, trying their best to describe something that was already understood without them. We are taught that communication depends on speaking. I'm beginning to believe its foundation is attention. Real understanding rarely announces itself through perfect sentences. Sometimes it appears through shared stillness, through the comfort of not rushing to fill every silence, through the quiet certainty that nothing needs defending in that moment. There is an honesty inside that kind of silence which no performance can imitate. I've always admired people who could remain there comfortably, not because they appeared mysterious, because they appeared free from the exhausting need to constantly explain themselves, free from the pressure of becoming unforgettable, free enough to allow each moment to remain exactly what it was without forcing it into something larger. Perhaps that is where genuine confidence begins, not in speaking more, but in needing to prove less. Most of my life, I believe certainty was the reward for paying close enough attention. I assumed that if I observed carefully, reflected honestly, and remained patient long enough, every important question would eventually surrender its answer. Lately, that belief has begun to dissolve, not because answers no longer matter, because I've discovered that some questions exist to reshape the person asking them, not to be solved. The longer I watch my own thoughts without rushing to correct them, the more I realize that understanding behaves differently than I imagined. It cannot be forced. It cannot be hurried. It arrives only after you've stopped demanding that it arrive. That is difficult in a world built around immediacy. Everything encourages us to decide quickly, to form opinions instantly, to define people before we've truly seen them, to choose certainty over curiosity because certainty feels safer. Yet the experiences that have remained with me the longest never arrived with urgency. They appeared quietly, almost gently, as though truth itself had no interest in competing with noise. I've started asking myself different questions, not whether someone understands me, not whether they agree with me, but whether their presence changes the quality of my awareness. Some people leave you exactly as they found you. Others leave without realizing they've quietly expanded the boundaries of your thinking. That difference is impossible to measure, yet once you've experienced it, you begin noticing it everywhere. I used to believe growth meant becoming someone different. Now I suspect it means becoming more honest about who you've always been. There are parts of ourselves that remain hidden not because they don't exist, but because life has never asked them to appear. Then one experience, one conversation, one unexpected silence, suddenly creates the space where those forgotten parts can finally breathe. Nothing dramatic happens. You simply begin responding differently. The things that once disturbed you lose their authority. The opinions you once defended become easier to release. The certainty you once protected begins making room for curiosity. At first, I resisted that feeling, not because I feared change, because familiarity is comfortable. There is a strange security in believing you've already understood yourself. It removes the responsibility of looking again, but familiarity isn't always truth. Sometimes it's only repetition. The mind has an extraordinary ability to mistake repetition for reality. If we think the same thought often enough, we begin calling it our identity. If we repeat the same interpretation for years, we stop recognizing it as an interpretation at all. It simply becomes the way the world appears. Looking back, I realize how often I edited the details of my life while leaving the deeper assumptions untouched. I questioned my decisions, rarely the perspective that produced them. I examined the story, almost never the storyteller. Perhaps that's where the deepest transformation begins, not by changing circumstances. By becoming aware of the lens through which we've been seeing them. Awareness doesn't always make life easier. Often it makes life more complex. You begin noticing contradictions inside yourself. You recognize strengths beside insecurities, confidence beside uncertainty, logic beside intuition. Instead of choosing one and rejecting the other, you slowly learn that maturity isn't about eliminating complexity. It's about becoming spacious enough to hold it. That realization brought an unexpected sense of peace. For years I believed completeness meant perfection. Now I think completeness means integration, allowing every honest part of yourself to belong without demanding that every part agree. Life becomes lighter after that, not because difficulties disappear, because you stop fighting yourself while facing them. I've also noticed something else. Many of the fears I carried no longer belong to the person I've become, yet I continued protecting myself as though they still did. We often guard old wounds long after they've healed. We continue expecting yesterday's pain to return simply because it once did. Healing isn't pretending the past never happened. It's recognizing that the past no longer deserves control over every decision you make today. That realization changes something subtle. You become less interested in controlling outcomes, more interested in responding honestly to whatever arrives. That isn't weakness. It's trust. Not trust that life will always be gentle. Trust that you've become someone capable of meeting difficulty without abandoning yourself. Perhaps that is confidence in its quietest form, not believing nothing difficult will happen. Believing that whatever happens, you won't lose your integrity while facing it. Integrity has slowly become more valuable to me than certainty. Certainty changes. Integrity remains. It reminds you to choose honesty when convenient answers appear. It reminds you to remain compassionate when judgment feels easier. It reminds you that character is revealed less by circumstances than by the way you respond to them. I've come to believe that wisdom rarely announces itself loudly. It speaks with remarkable patience. It asks you to observe a little longer, to listen before explaining, to remain curious after everyone else has already decided. Perhaps that is why the people who seem wisest are often the least interested in proving they are. They leave room for questions. Room for complexity, room for reality to reveal itself before assigning meaning to it. I want to become that kind of person, someone who listens longer than necessary, who pays attention before reaching conclusions, who allows silence to finish speaking before offering words. Because silence has become one of my greatest teachers. It has shown me that attention is different from effort. Effort pushes. Attention receives. Effort insists. Attention notices. Effort wants certainty. Attention welcomes discovery. For years I admired discipline above everything else. I still do. But discipline without awareness can carry you confidently in the wrong direction. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't continue moving. It's pause long enough to ask whether we are still walking towards something true. Identity has changed its meaning for me as well. I once believed identity was something fixed, a final description of who we are. Now I see it as something living, something that continues unfolding every time we are willing to become more honest than we were yesterday. Perhaps we never truly finish becoming ourselves. Perhaps we simply continue removing the layers that certainty convinced us we needed. There is comfort in that thought. It means being unfinished isn't failure. It's possibility. It means tomorrow is still capable of surprising you. It means life still has lessons waiting beyond the horizon of what you already understand. And maybe that has been the lesson hidden beneath all the others. Life was never asking me to know everything. It was asking me to remain awake, to notice, to question gently, to release conclusions that had quietly become cages. To meet each new experience without forcing it to resemble the last. Looking back now, I feel grateful for every uncertainty that refused to disappear, every unanswered question, every quiet season that slowed me down enough to hear myself honestly. Because each one revealed something certainty never could. That growth isn't an event. It's a practice. Awareness isn't a destination. It's a way of living. And transformation doesn't begin the moment the world changes. It begins the moment you're willing to see the world, and yourself, without the protection of old assumptions. Maybe that is all any of us are really searching for. Not perfect answers, not permanent certainty. Just the quiet courage to remain open as life continues revealing itself one ordinary moment at a time. If there is one truth I hope never to forget, it is this. They happen in silence. One thought becoming slightly more honest than the last. One old fear quietly releasing its grip. One familiar certainty making room for a larger perspective. Until one day you look back and realize that nothing around you needed to change before everything inside you already had. And perhaps that has always been the real journey, not becoming someone else, but becoming present enough to recognize the person you were slowly becoming all along. For now, that is enough, because every quiet realization becomes the beginning of another, and somewhere beyond everything I understand today, another truth is already waiting, not asking to be chased, only waiting until I become still enough to recognize it.